Hello, everyone. Welcome to the DMV Business Show. I'm your host, Otto Sevilla. Today I have a special guest, Marc D'Antin. Marc is the director of Fit Learning in Washington, D.C., currently in Dupont Circle, right, Marc?
That's right. Yeah, that's where our office is. Well, that's not where I am right this minute, obviously, or for very much of the day, but that's where our office is.
Yes, when we're not in COVID, that's typically where he is.
Right.
Yes. But before we get into the business, which for the audience, I think this is going to be huge. When I first chatted with Marc about what he does and education, it just opened my eyes as far as what he does in a condensed period of time and what you can learn and what he teaches. But before we get there, just so the audience can get to know Marc a little bit, if you can please start Marc off, just, where are you from? Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
Sure. Yeah. So it's great to be here. Great talking to you. So I had kind of a weirdly international upbringing. And it kind of feeds into some of the things that happened over the course of my life and what led me to where I am. I was born in Panama, not Panamanian in the sense of neither of my parents are Panamanian. It was sort of a weird diplomatic situation that my dad was in. And then I grew up in New York and spent a year in Germany and a couple of years in Spain. And that was all kind of the result of my mom and dad had a rocky relationship. They divorced when I was young. And so while I lived with them for a time in New York, then when I lived in Germany, it was with an aunt and uncle. When I lived in Spain, it was with another aunt and uncle. We eventually moved to Florida when I was 10. And after a few years in Florida, I ended up moving, my mom ended up moving back to Spain, and I ended up living with some friends, their family in Florida. And that's where I spent a good chunk of my career and a good chunk of my life was from the age of 10 through grad school. Really, I was in Florida. So a lot of different families, a lot of different dynamics that I experienced growing up, but kind of an internet. And then I lived in Seattle for a little while before finally moving to settling in DC.
Marc, if you don't mind me asking, so you sort of permanently came back to the States around 10, and that was in Florida, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Before that, it was more international, different countries, different areas throughout the world. Out of, I think you said Germany, born in Panama, you said Spain as well, before 10. Where was, I guess, the longest period of time in any of these countries that you resided?
I was in Spain for about 3 years.
Okay.
So, sort of formative, 7, 8, 9. Still pretty young, but I remember that time pretty well.
So you still remember growing up in all these different countries, right?
Yeah, I do. And my family, my mom, my brother and sister, they all live in Spain at the moment. So, and I have a lot of family in Germany and other parts of Europe. I still remember all of that. Still kind of.
So as far as language, I'm curious, how old were you when you left Panama, or were you just going there?
Oh, I was 6 months old. I do not have memory of Panama. No, that was just a short, that just happened to be where I was born.
So since all the different countries, languages, how many languages do you know?
I speak fluently 4 languages. I learned English and Spanish kind of at the same time. And then German. Like I said, I lived in Germany for a while. That's the language that my family has in common is German. And then while I was living in Spain, I was living near Barcelona, and in Barcelona they speak Catalan. So in schooling in Spain, you learn Catalan. A lot of your classes are in Catalan as opposed to in Spanish. So those 4 fluently. Currently trying to learn Russian and get by in French.
Okay, so you said Spanish, German, Catalan, right?
A little bit of English.
Well, what was the 5th? That's 4. Was it 4 or 5? You said
4. I speak 4 languages fluently.
4 fluent. Mm-hmm. Okay. At home, though, what was the main language?
It was primarily English. Okay. My mom is German in her upbringing, but she has an affinity for English, and my brother and sister and I all speak English, even though they're in Spain, and that's what they mostly speak. We all speak English to each other. So yeah, primarily English. Okay. Sometimes we'll switch languages, just kind of as you do, but for the most part, yeah, I would say we're an English-speaking family.
I'm curious. As far as all the traveling, you typically hear it if you're like in the military family, then you have to.
Yeah, that's the question I always get. Are you a military family? Yeah, it just happens to be because my mom was European, married another European guy who happened to have business in the States, and then so the entire family structure, all of her siblings, all of my cousins, they all live in Europe. So I'm sort of lone person here in the States, but feel very American in every way just because I've spent most of my life here.
How were you as a child growing up before 10, all these changes for you? And I'm sure it wasn't easy. I mean, I didn't experience any of that. I immigrated here, but I came here at such a young age, and we were always in the DC metropolitan area. But how was that for you? All these different countries and languages, especially seeing at this under 10, what do you remember? How were you like? Did you have any interest or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as far as how I experienced it, as a kid, when you're under that age, you're kind of going wherever the wind blows, wherever your parents are, wherever your loved ones are, is kind of where you want to be. I do feel like I got a good idea of, I was more open to different cultures because, I would adapt to in Spain, I played a lot of soccer. I refused to play soccer in the States. Played basketball when I got to the States, right? So the interests were related to what everybody was doing wherever I was. But it was I think it's something that I was old enough to be able to take in a lot of the culture and understand and understand that, well, this is how things are done here and this is how things are done here. And it allows you to be more adaptive, I feel like, when you have to experience different cultures in kind of quick succession, to kind of, understand that you have to be a different person, and that's okay, depending on where you are and what your and what your surroundings are like and who you're around and what the norms are in that location. And really, if you look at it, I mean, our culture is different from European culture, our culture meaning the States, but that doesn't mean it's not that drastically different. I think if, I had been in an Asian country or another country that had more cultural differences, maybe it would have been more of a challenge. I feel like kids are adaptive and they could probably do just as well. But you also see a lot of similarities.
I hear that a lot when I talk to people who moved a lot during childhood. They're like, I can go anywhere, and they're like, that I like it. I had a group of friends, and then I'm taken out of this area, and then I'm putting to this, because my parents had to move for whatever reasons.
Yeah.
But they easily could just pick up and just form new relationships, new friendships, and they were always, just like you mentioned, very adaptable to their surroundings.
And that was different when I turned 15. As I mentioned, my mom moved to Spain, and at that time I ended up staying in Florida with a friend of mine. At that point, I sort of put down my foot and is stubborn teenager.
You're like, I'm done, I'm tired.
Yeah, and I didn't want to finish high school out in a different country, so I ended up staying. And at that point, I didn't feel very adaptable, but I probably would have been fine had I chosen to move back again.
No, but at 15 is different. I mean, you're close to 18 than 10 there, and yeah. But at that age, were you into? I know you mentioned soccer, but was there anything that you can recollect that interests you? That whether sports or any subject in school that sort of sparked your interest? Or
in school I always liked science and math. Those kind of nerdy things. I was a mathlete in middle school.
Did you compete?
In middle school I competed. Yeah, I don't know that I did particularly well, but I was a part of that. So that nerdy crew. So yeah, I was always pretty studious in that sense, and interested in science and math were the ones I loved the most. I wasn't a super big fan of history and English and literature and those kinds of things, but I liked my science and my math. So
you stayed and you finished high school in Florida, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Where in Florida?
I spent my school years from 10 on in Naples, Florida, so Southwest Florida.
Okay.
And then I went to college at University of Central Florida in Orlando. Stayed in state for tuition purposes. It was a good move. Studied psychology there. My intention had always been to become a doctor or a lawyer, kind of what all kids are kind of told they need to be. And as I was in college, I realized that wasn't really for me. And I was interested in psychology, and it was a major that a lot of kids were doing, which is problematic long term because it's a very popular major and there's only so much you can do with a psychology degree. But I've kind of found a niche that I'm happy with, since then.
So you did undergrad with psychology, and the thought there was no longer medical or law school. What were you thinking? Because a lot of people typically, have to go get the doctorate, right? If they want to continue and become.
Yeah,
right?
psychology is not an endpoint as an undergraduate. I mean, you could definitely do something with it. The thing about, I didn't have a ton of support. I was a large university, University of Central Florida, had a ton of kids, and I didn't do a good job seeking out that support, which, is also, I'm an 18-year-old in college. The university should have provided more support, but I got it because I enjoyed the classes and not really thinking about what that meant for my future. I guess I had a general notion that maybe I always wanted to work with kids. That was one thing that was consistent. Even when I wanted to be a doctor, the idea would be to be a pediatrician. But
Hold on 1 second, Marc. I'm curious. So why kids, even when you were a doctor? Why that interest with children?
I really couldn't tell you. It was just something that since I was young, it was the idea was to work with kids. I couldn't pinpoint that to any specific thing. It was just, you get something in your head, and the world kind of formed itself around that idea that, when I explored something, the kids were I've always said I wanted to work with kids. So that's probably what I want to do. The fact that it didn't have any basis didn't really matter for that purpose.
Were you exposed maybe babysitting or anything like that, or tutoring even in college, or no? Did you do any of that? Okay.
Yeah. And in college, I actually didn't work with kids very much in college. It wasn't until I was out of college that I started working with almost exclusively with kids. But the idea in college was still, if I'm going to work in psychology, it's going to be with kids. But yeah, they didn't. But as far as what I was going to do, that was completely up in the air.
Sure.
And I didn't enjoy the work. I loved working with the individuals, but I felt like what I was doing was not effective. The work that I was supposed to be doing with these individuals didn't seem like it was producing much. And I wondered about these behavior analysts. I barely ever saw them, and I thought, whatever these guys are doing, it doesn't seem great to me. And I ended up getting a job at a different at a school for. I was having I found this job at a school for kids with emotional disabilities, which is a little bit more in line with what I was doing in my master's program. These were kids not with autism, but with, issues in school where they couldn't behave. They had behavior issues. They would beat up the teacher. They would throw a computer. So they all got sent to a special school. And I worked at that school.
Marc, and this school was just with this type of kids, right? Because they were sent here. Okay.
It was a public school in Orlando, where elementary age kids who had been kicked out of essentially 2 other public schools at least, and then they ended up at this school for kids with intensive behavior issues.
Oh, and these are elementary school kids.
These are elementary school kids.
Wow,
yeah.
Okay.
So they've had a lot of kids with really rough upbringings.
Sure.
And so I did everything at that school I was a teacher's aide, and all the way up to leading a team that was considered the behavior department. We would help try to improve the behaviors of the kids, try to put systems in place to improve the kids, over the 3 or 4 years that I worked there. At that school, I worked under a behavior analyst. And again, I had this negative impression of behavior analyst, but the work that she did was incredible. The change that I saw in these kids in a short amount of time was really, really awesome. And so I realized that was more my passion now that I found what behavior analysis could be. And so after my master's, I got a certification in behavior analysis, which is, again, it's a subset of psychology, to still fit in with what I was doing. And the focus is on behavior change. So it's primarily used with kids with autism to help them be able to engage with the world the way that it is. Kids with autism often have different ways of interacting with the world. And there's nothing wrong with that, but when they need to also have the skills to be able to engage with the world as it is. And so behavior analysts are really successful in changing that. But we are also successful in changing all kinds of other behaviors, again, including aggressive behaviors from kids at a school where there's behavior problems. So I became a behavior analyst, and then moved into a district position where I was working with 13 or 14 different schools, providing behavior intervention support for those 13 or 14 schools that all had kids like this. So it's, kind of a roundabout journey. We're still not where I am now, which is a little bit different from what I was even doing then.
Marc, but I'm curious. This is totally not at all my field, but dealing with these children, what are some tactics or skills that you use to help them sort of?
So one of the big things to note about these kind of kids is that, that a lot of them come from rough upbringings, rough home lives, whether it's neglect or potentially abuse. And a lot of what they experience in school is negative. A lot of the reactions that they experience from the adults around them is negative. If it's the kid, they're the kid at home, they don't get any attention. And one of the ways they get attention is by being loud and being bad.
Yeah,
And so one of the things that, just to give you a quick example at a school, is that in a regular classroom, the majority of the interaction between the teacher and that kid is going to be negative. Sit down. No, that's wrong. Don't do that. Don't do that. Most of their interactions are going to be negative. One of the most important things to know when you're working with kids like that is that they need to have far more positive interactions than negative. And so like the ratio is, the low end of the ratio for a kid that's already at that level is about 13 or 14 positive interactions for every negative interaction that they have. So if you have to correct them, that's okay, but you need to find lots of stuff to be positive about as well. So you need to set up their environment to where they're having lots and lots of success. So it's about setting up an environment that allows them to be successful and have positive interactions with school. Because again, most of what they're experiencing with school is a terrible place. Home is a terrible place, but school is terrible too. And you want school to be a comfort as much as possible. And you want them to be happy. And if they're not happy, talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs as an example. If they're not comfortable and happy and feeling safe, learning is not anywhere in the cards for them. They'd rather be running around the school, cursing out people, throwing computers, punching people than learning. And so you got to set up an environment that's comfortable and helps them be successful.
So I'm sure the way you communicate to them is huge and very important. Instead of that example you just gave earlier, the teacher will tell the student, have a seat, class will start. So you're telling him what to do. In that situation, what would be the way you would communicate, or just an example there as far as you need a lot of more positivity, which I completely understand.
Yeah, it's really hard if you've got a kid at that level in a full classroom where you got a bunch of kids who are not having behavior issues, and you've got one or two that are having behavior issues. It's kind of it's really impossible to give the teacher. And I've worked with a lot of teachers and tried to provide them with supports to make sure that their classrooms can run more effectively and while still supporting that individual with the behavior issue. Again, it's just about finding. So if you have to tell the kid, hey, you need to be sitting down. Number one, you can say it in a different way, right? You don't need to be, you need to be stern and tell them to sit down, but like, hey, the expectation right now is that we sit. And then, so now it's not a negative interaction. And then you got to find, oh my gosh, so good job sitting. Hey, you got your pencil on the chair. That's awesome. Oh, your paper's there too. That's great. And you're looking at me. That's awesome. So now I've got 4 positive interactions after that one, let's say, corrective where I tell them to sit down. So again, this is one small example of how
so it's basically one positivity after another and then another and continue. Okay.
Right.
That's interesting. Okay. So you were at that school there for a few years, you said?
I was at the school for the kids with the behavior issues for 3 or 4 years. And I spent a year district level working with 12 different schools around this. This is in Orange County, Florida, not Orange County, California. Orange County. I was at a district level in Orange County, Florida.
But the 12, 13 schools also similar school as far as they were all just children?
They were regular schools that had classrooms that could help. So there was a regular elementary school, and they might have 1 or 2 classrooms in that school that could help, that had a small number of kids, large number of teachers that would help with their behaviors.
Okay. So your focus was in those classrooms.
Right.
Okay. So then after that, then what was next?
And then I got a job with, I started reaching out to other behavior analysts in the community, got to know more folks in the community. And I was introduced to Dr. Josh Pritchard, who was a professor at Florida Institute of Technology and was doing a lot of really cool stuff. And he had a school that was for individuals with autism. So I'd worked with individuals with autism originally, and now I was kind of moving back into that. Individuals with autism with severe behaviors. That was kind of the link between those two. And so he, the director of the school was leaving. And so he offered me the position of the director at that school. And so I spent 2 years as the director of that school in Orlando, and working with, it was a school with a lot of one-to-one supports for individuals with autism, pretty severe autism. So these are not high-functioning kids. These are kids who need help with communication and with very basic living skills. But a lot of them had pretty severe behaviors, pretty severe self-injury, hurting themselves or hurting other people. And so providing a safe environment and providing really effective instruction to make sure that they were able to learn when kids that were not able to learn in other learning environments. So I was pretty proud of the work there. And from there, I was married at the time, and my ex-wife now got a job at Amazon. So we moved out to Seattle, and I got a job as a behavior analyst there. as I mentioned, we got a divorce, and so I end up having this brand new freedom in life, let's say, and that's kind of how I landed in what I'm doing now. I had an opportunity, I didn't want to necessarily start fresh. I loved what I was doing, but I had the opportunity to start something new, and I would have never, anticipated becoming a business owner. That was not something that I had. Looking back now, as I was kind of preparing for this discussion, I kind of had some thoughts about why maybe I did end up deciding to go this route. But the Dr. Pritchard, who I was telling you about, who was the owner of the school, he when I was leaving Seattle, I called him and I said, hey, listen, this is happening in my life. I kind of want to do something fresh. Like, what are some advice you have? What are some thoughts that you have? And he said, well, you should open one of these centers, a fit learning center. And I had only minimal idea what that was. I'd heard him talking about it in the past. I kept in touch with him.
Was he involved? Was he involved with those centers also?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So, just to explain quickly about fit learning, it's a learning labs, we call them, and there are 35 plus around the country. There's internationally too. There's one in Alaska. One in Canada. Obviously, that would be international. One in Canada and one in Australia. And they originally started in 1996. Two PhD students from the University of Nevada, Reno, created this system using behavior analysis. So they were both behavior analysts, and they used the system of behavior analysis to work in more of an educational sphere. And so they created a system for teaching initially reading and math. They've got a couple other curriculum areas now, but in incredibly effective ways. And so Dr. Pritchard, had already partnered, as Fit Learning decided to expand and create other Fit Learnings around the country. Dr. Pritchard was partnered up with, at the time, I think 3 of them around the country. Why don't you open one? And I was interested in the idea of starting completely fresh and moving somewhere new. And I always loved DC. And so I said, hey, I'm interested in moving to DC. Is that a good place? And he said, absolutely. So it's, he's my partner in this venture, and I got myself trained in fit learning, which took over, even given my master's and my postgraduate certification in behavior analysis, it still took me a year and a half to get fully trained in being able to not only implement the program effectively with kids, but also in training people that work for me, and in being able to really use the system effectively. So, that's where I find myself now, is really excited about bringing this teaching technology to DC and working with kids here.
Marc, so when you had the conversation with your Dr. Pritchard, you said, right?
Pritchard, yeah.
Yeah, Pritchard. This is you still in Seattle, calling him, saying, "Hey, what are your ideas?" Right? When this was okay.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I mean, I asked him, should I get a PhD? I thought about getting a JD. I thought about, just looking. I was, I'd run a clinic before, or a school, so maybe looking for one of those, another job in that realm. And yeah, he said, yeah, you could do those things, but but I'm working with this really amazing company, and what do you think? So
and then
it didn't take it.
Okay.
I looked into it. It didn't take me very long to be convinced. I'd already heard things about it previously that it enticed me, and it was so it didn't take me very long to be convinced this was a cool idea. I brand new thing, doing it essentially on my own. He was partnering with me, but he has a lot going on in the world. So so yeah.
And it was your idea to DC, from Seattle to Washington DC. That was you.
Yeah, I actually sent him a few cities. DC was always my number one on the list.
Why DC?
So I get one of those things. It's hard for me to say. I visited a couple times.
Okay, so you had visited here before.
Yeah,
okay.
But I mean, like minimally,
sure.
A couple days here and there, touristy things. But just something about the city really, really drew me. I feel like it has a European vibe to it in terms of the architecture and the all the great things you can do and see. And it's not quite as busy as a larger city like New York or San Francisco, which already have fit learning, so that wasn't going to be an option anyway if that's the route I wanted to take. But I'd always been interested in DC, and it was always something that I at some point in my life I knew I wanted to live here, and so this provided that opportunity to if it was going to be realistic.
That's good. Okay, so that was one of your top cities, and you mentioned it to him, and he was like, DC will be great. I mean, the demographics here is also amazing for what you do.
Right.
Yeah. So then you did the training. Training was in Florida or no?
Well, the training, as I mentioned, it was a year and a half of training. It was almost like another master's degree. It's when you're getting trained in this program, everybody starts from the bottom. So no matter what, if you've got a PhD, a master's, if you're right out of high school, it doesn't matter. You start at the bottom. So you start at the bottom, meaning that you start with working with kids. And I still work with kids. 4 hours a day. I'm still working with kids, but even now. But the idea is that you start with learning how to run the curriculum and run this. So we do our most popular curriculum areas are reading, math, and logic, which is something that's good for reading comprehension, but also for kids that are on the spectrum. Only about 40% of the kids that we work with have a disability. Most of the kids don't have a disability, but we're very effective with kids with disabilities as well. But so I spent a week I did a week training in Orlando. And then I had to implement what I learned, how to work with kids for 3 or 4 months to prove that I could do it, record myself, send those videos out to the headquarters is in Reno, Nevada.
Okay, that's where headquarters is. Okay.
And then I spent a week in Austin and a week in Reno over the course of that year. But all the while in between, doing lots of work to continue to train myself up, get things, make sure that I was running things correctly. So there's a lot of oversight as you're getting trained up, again, over the course of the year and a half, essentially.
Okay. And then in the end, when you're ready, you moved to DC, or were you residing in DC then?
No, it was once I was really ready to go. I had moved back to Orlando and I was living there while I was getting myself trained up, and then I moved to DC the earliest I could. As soon as I was ready, I had all my certifications. I felt prepared, as prepared as one can be for a thing like this. Moved to DC. It was May of 2019.
Okay. So then you find your place in DC. You open up, and now you're a business owner. And you weren't. I'm sure that you weren't prepared for that, right?
No, I mean, again, I knew that it was a thing that was going to happen when I first discussed it with Dr. Pritchard, a year and a half before that. But it was. I didn't know what to expect. Again, I never really anticipated the idea of becoming a business owner up until that moment. And so it was, I was suddenly a business owner and suddenly had an office and needed to figure out what to do with myself in that situation.
So then what happens? Does headquarter corporate then help out as far as providing you like initial learners or clients?
No, nothing like that. It's it's what we are. We're not a franchise model. We're a learning. So we call ourselves learning labs. It's not a business term, I guess, but the idea is we essentially pay for the intellectual property, and then we also pay for oversight. So I meet regularly with the team in Reno, and they provide a lot of oversight to make sure that they do yearly site visits. But aside from that, we're basically on our own in all the good and bad ways that they provide us with supports in the context of there's a lot marketing materials and things like that. But as far as finding out how to make your way in this whatever city you're in, a lot of people that start Fit Learnings already have a lot of connections in the community. Obviously, that wasn't the case for me. I had to kind of do that from scratch. Which was a fun experience in and of itself, meeting, networking, meeting a lot of people, kind of getting out what we do. But aside from that, there's a community where you can bounce back and forth ideas that you've done and what other, what's worked for other people. But that's the interesting thing is that, especially when it comes to education, it's so different from community to community. We think of the public school system as being very similar across the board. But the way that it's structured and the way that the different elements of education intersect is so different from community to community. I've experienced pretty heavily within both Orlando and Seattle and now DC, and all three of those are just so different. And certain words that you use that are normal words to use in Orlando are very improper to use in DC. And I mean that you'll offend somebody. I just mean that if I like, for example, I can't think of what the term was now. But there was a term that I used when I was talking to several professionals, and finally about third or fourth professional that I talked to said, "Hey, you're using that word. That word in DC means that you're a private school that can't get certification And so you're basically working on it's strange that I can't remember the word now, but it was, so I realized that I can't say that. I've forgotten it because I'm not allowed to say it anymore.
Okay.
So a word that was perfectly acceptable to use in Orlando is now something that would make me seem like I'm something that I'm completely not. And so just little things like that, or, when you don't have a foothold in the community, there's not much support that you can get unless you've got somebody that understands that world.
Sure. Now, before we get as far as what you do and what you teach and everything else, I'm curious because your whole learning and everything preparing you to this point to finally open your center, your lab, what is it called again?
We call it a lab, yeah.
Your lab is just about how to teach and how to teach the student, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Did they teach you also as far as how to get the students or development, or whether it's how to bring them in, because that's a whole nother part of the business.
That's the part. The thing about it is that the one of the company is, and the service we provide is incredible. And so when, as I mentioned, initially this was started in Reno, right? And they were able to they started with just their professors at the university, and they sent their kids, and then word of mouth spread, and they were able to build a really large business. Right now I think they service anywhere from 60 to 100 kids a week at their center in Reno, and it's the same in New York. And that was all through word of mouth. They hardly had to do any marketing.
Wow.
I'm not even sure they did any marketing. It was all just word of mouth. And so when the company, the headquarters decided, well, we want to put Fit Learning in other places and create this model, it wasn't really something that they'd experienced. And so they're trying to provide supports where they can,
sure.
But their experience is somewhat limited in terms of what to tell us to do. And so, I can explain what we do pretty well. I can explain it to parents. I can communicate with other professionals, but who to reach out to, like what the most effective venues for marketing are. Those are not things that really, we're kind of jumping at this from zero, basically.
So
when I came to DC.
It sounds like Reno, New York City, were a lot of just word of mouth, mostly just, I'm sure, parents or other professionals referring the center, correct?
Right, absolutely.
Now,
that's been the case in most of the centers that have eventually become successful. They'll find a couple folks, and even here in DC, I had a family or two that have provided, where we are now. The majority of my kids that come in are still from referrals from just a couple of parents and from parents of those friends of those parents. So I'm having a similar experience here.
That's interesting. So it is not just happening in New York City or Reno; it's happening in the other centers as well.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the product that the service that we provide is really cool, and parents like to be able to say like, oh, I found this service and you should try it out, because the results that we get are pretty incredible.
So what is it exactly then? If you can share it with the audience, what is it exactly the service that you provide?
Sure. So what we do is I'll try to explain this in my brief elevator pitch here. We, as I mentioned before, we do reading and math primarily. We have a couple other subject areas, but what we get is we get families where their child, we call them learners, and we call the folks that are working with kids coaches, and I'll explain why we use those terms. And fit learning, right? So it's fitness. It's fitness for your cognitive abilities. What we get is we get kids that are a year or two behind. They're falling behind their classmates whether it comes to reading or math, and the family's looking for a way to get some additional supports. And so what often happens in education is that kids are going through the grades, and as long as they're generally successful, they get pushed on to the next grade. And even if they're not successful, sometimes they'll get pushed on. But and kids are really resilient. So if they shouldn't have been pushed on, they'll figure out ways around some of the things that they missed in school. Let's talk about reading specifically. So in reading, a lot of the kids that we get are really strong sight readers. So they're able to identify words based on context really, really well. But if you present them with a brand new word, they may not be able to sound it out, or it may slow them down a ton. And so what we do is we do an assessment initially where we find out where the kid is, where the learner is. I'll use the correct terminology here. Where the learner is in all of these core basic skills, really basic skills that some kids are expected to be adept at. And that if you're in now 4th or 5th grade, the teacher's not going to ask if you know what A says or what B says or what the alphabet is or what 3 plus 4 is. They're going to expect that you know that stuff. And if you don't, they're not going to go back and figure out like, well, what are you missing? What skills are you missing? So we figure out, we have an assessment that we do that targets all of these really, really important skills. It figures out like, what did you miss? What days of school did you miss? Or what did your teacher not do a good job teaching you? And we teach up those skills to what we call fluency. And that's the big thing. What we do is called precision teaching. So that's a subset of behavior analysis that focuses on academics and on teaching educational skills as opposed to behavior in the other sense of the word. And so we teach those things to fluency. And fluency to us is kind of like being fluent in a language. You don't have to think about it when you respond. So if I'm asking you to translate something into Spanish, you'll be able to do it, or you'll be able to start speaking in Spanish without having to think of that translation if you're fluent in Spanish. Or in the context of education, if I ask you what's 3 times 4, you'll say 12 without having to think about that. That's being fluent in that concept. It's also important to know that 3 times 4 is 3 4 times, and that 3 is 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3. But it's more important as you get ahead in education to know that it's 12 right away, because if you're doing long division, you better know that 3 times 4 is 12 quickly. And so we teach these basic concepts, up to fluency through. It's really fun through dynamic engagement with the kid. That's why it took so long to train, is because you have to be really engaged. The session has to be incredibly dynamic. The kid can't have a second of downtime, but they're having fun the whole time. They're getting points. They're changing those points in for prizes. And what we find is, and this has been consistent across over 2,000 learners over the last, X number of years, is that we can get at least 1 grade level of growth in 40 hours of instruction. So we discover what grade level the kid is at when we start. Often it's 1 or 2 grade levels behind with most of the kids that we find. And within, 40 hours, we can get a lot of those kids caught up to where they need to be in terms of reading. If they're further behind, it's going to take a little bit longer. But the thing about what we, again, focusing on those really core skills is, and then training up more advanced skills as they master those core skills. And just being really individualized, like, what does this kid need? We don't give kids cookie cutter, enrollment. Everything is completely individualized to that learner. And if they learn something really fast, then we're ready to move on to the next thing the next day. And the other, so, the reason I can see this being what I do for the rest of my life and not changing careers as I did in the past is because I've always been interested in quantitatively being able to show behavior change. And a lot of the things that I've done in the past have done that. I've seen behavior change in kids because of the things that I've done. And that's what I love the most, is seeing the change based on how I'm changing the environment, how the kid is able to, talk when they couldn't talk before, or able to sit in their seat for 30 minutes, where before they couldn't sit for more than 5 minutes. But this program, the change is just so incredible. From moment to moment, from minute to minute, from day to day, from week to week, I see more change in kids than I've ever seen in anything I've done before. And it's just a really, really cool model, and it's really fun. I love being a coach when I'm a coach, and I love seeing the growth that kids make and having evidence, which is, again, the reason I steered away from counseling, is because the evidence is, I feel better today. Well, that's great, but where's that? I need evidence, and this program offers paper number evidence that improvements are being made and that this growth is happening.
That's amazing, Marc. What do you hear? What's the feedback you hear from the parent? If I don't know, I'm sure. So before that, actually, I was going to say the ages, because I know you work not just with children, you also do adults as well, right?
Well, it's primarily children. So I have an individual that I work with who's 20, and he is an individual who's has a disability, and so I'm working with him on remediating some of those skills. So that's not common. I have a partner in Nebraska who worked with a 50-year-old woman who really wanted to be able to read her Bible better, and so he taught her how to read through the program, which is pretty incredible. So it works for it doesn't have to be any particular age. Sure. But we work with kids anywhere from 3 through 18. I mean, and again, it could be older, but and we're targeting whatever we're working on based on that kid's age and abilities. I had a 9th grader last year who was in regular classes, was diagnosed with ADHD, but when I assessed him, he couldn't get through his alphabet, and he was in regular classes, and so we were able to get his reading up 2 grade levels in those 40 hours. And it's just because at some point, probably because of his ADHD, he wasn't able to focus on something the teacher was teaching in 1st grade, and missing that, nobody went back to check if, like, do you have these skills, or are we expecting you to be able to do these advanced things when you're missing out on some really core things? So that's, the age doesn't matter. Disability doesn't really matter for us. All kids can learn. We're able to, as long as we can figure out where you are and what you need, we can help achieve that growth.
I can see why the main source is the main referral. It's coming from the parent, because I'm sure they're seeing it firsthand at home and in school, the results and everything, what you're doing, how's that trickling down through school and everything else.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
we do find that parents will, pretty quickly, within a few weeks, because again, it's sort of plays back to what you asked about earlier, which is the kids in school getting those, mostly negative reactions from the teachers and increasing those to positive. Our sessions are so positive. The kids, we see improvements in self-esteem incredibly quickly. And
it's almost like the game. You're telling me, like, I almost want to play. I want to win points and see what the prize is at the end,
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's the kids we're incredibly positive, and they're competing against themselves, right? And you're going to make improvement. If you practice at something, it's almost impossible not to make improvement over time. I mean, moods can change, right? But for the most part, over time, you're going to make improvement if you're practicing a skill. And so you're going to see success. We're going to figure out a way to help you see success. And so that does improve. We've heard from teachers directly and from parents that they're seeing, like, improvements in their kids' self-esteem and in their willingness to participate in class. And I've got tons of anecdotes of that kind of stuff. That's a really fun thing to hear too. Obviously, we don't see that, but I love hearing that from parents.
Sure. I wonder, once let's say you coach them up to whatever level they're needed, or even surpass whatever level, does it end there, or is it a consistent thing? They stay with you, or how does that work?
I love to be able to tell a parent. I love to be able to tell a parent, like, they're done. Well, we've caught them up. We could advance them, but I don't know if that's worth they're doing great. They're going to continue. Now that they have those skills, they're going to be able to take that on and engage in class effectively. We have parents that do want to continue and find some other subject area where the kid might be struggling. But I love telling a parent that, they've graduated from our reading. They're there.
Okay.
So the idea is, what we teach, part of fluency is being able to, if you don't practice this skill for in a year, you're still going to remember what 3 times 4 is, let's say.
Sure.
So yeah, there's an endpoint. That's another thing is, when it comes to things like counseling, it sounds like I'm ragging on counseling. There's a huge need for that in the world. I don't mean to do that. It's just not for me. One of the issues is that, there is an endpoint often in counseling, and in effective counseling and in ethical counseling, there should be, this is where we end. But it's harder to say when that is. We can tell you, once your kid is reading 150 words per minute, we've done what we wanted to do. And so, they'll be much more successful moving forward.
Okay. But I'm sure at that stage too, especially for the parent, they're seeing the positives, that how the kid has changed in their behavior and certain skills and everything else in school. They want to continue, I'm sure, that probably because they're probably not, if they're in the public school system, I don't know if they're getting that. It's highly unlikely. I don't want to speak for anyone, but they would want to continue to have that kid or put them in that environment with the coach, right?
Well,
and not lose that positivity.
Yeah, sure. But my point to the parent would be that often, as soon as a kid is able to feel successful in class, as soon as you're able to be more, if you were a kid who, I'm going to give you a common example. I often get kids, one of the measures that we do on, in our assessment is on comprehension. And so the kid will read a passage at their grade level, and then I'll take the passage away and I'll say, all right, tell me what you read. About half the time what the kid will say is, I don't know. I don't know anything. I don't remember anything. That'll be the very first reaction.
I can see that in my 9-year-old even now. Liam is like, it's like, oh,
right.
gosh. Okay.
And so one of the reasons that develops, and this isn't necessarily all the time, but one of the reasons that develops is that if you're reading something and the teacher asks you a question and you get it wrong, nope, sorry, and then they move on to the next kid, right? That's an incredibly traumatic reaction. It's much easier to just say, I don't know. And the teacher say, okay, and they'll move on to somebody else. And so that reaction, it causes them to miss out on certain elements or to just not pay attention when they're reading. So maybe it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so as soon as you give them that self-esteem, and that means that now they're going to take that back into class and they're going to be more ready to start interacting with the classroom effectively. Okay. And that also means that now the teacher is going to, the teacher's going to give them more positive feedback. So again, what we've seen is that when we taught you these skills, often you can take those and it leads to a more successful, that's a little bit more qualitative now than quantitative. But we have heard that the kids generally, parents that, while we're newer in DC, I've heard from other affiliates that have had kids for longer periods of time, parents emailing the Fit Learning folks years later and saying, it was a great thing that we did. I'm so glad that we did this thing, because they're still successful. They're still having these great outcomes. And so it is something that you're opening the door to more success. You're allowing yourself to engage with more success. So I wouldn't recommend a parent continue with us just for self-esteem. If that's the only place they're getting self-esteem, there's probably other issues that need to be dealt with.
Okay, well, that's good. I see it from the point is almost, with having 3 little ones is, putting them in all these other extracurricular activities for them to develop certain traits and things, whether it's athletics or different things that interest them. And they learn things, like you said, certain skills that hopefully they'll use through life, just like you mentioned, and they'll stay with them. So, okay, I see it from that point now. I wasn't thinking of it that way. With the learner and the coach, is it one-on-one or is it a coach?
All of our services are completely one-on-one. Yeah, that's an important element because the coach is having to focus entirely on that learner. We're taking behavior analysis is a science where you take lots of data on behavior. And so we're taking data on every single thing that the kid is doing, and we're reacting to that data as a coach. That's another reason why it takes so long to train in this, is because you have to be able to respond. The kid performed at this rate in this timing. Now we're doing another timing and they're performing lower. What do I need to change to make sure that this kid experiences success? And so it's the philosophy. One of the big philosophies of behavior analysis is that if the kid isn't learning, this is across behavior analysis, we need to change something about the way we're doing. All kids can learn. All organisms, there's a famous B.F. Skinner, who worked with, people might know from working with rats and pigeons. He's kind of the founder of behavior analysis, and his philosophy, I'm going to butcher this, and it's also potentially that this wasn't even something that he said, but he said that, if the rat isn't doing what you want it to do when he was training rats, then it's something, you need to change something about the way you're doing it. The rat will react to the environment the way, the rat's not wrong, you're wrong as the teacher. And so that's our philosophy too, is if the kid's not learning, we're doing something wrong. We need to change something about the way we do. It's not the kid's fault.
Okay, I see. What would you say, Marc, throughout your career, or even now you've been involved now with Fit Learning for almost 2 years, right?
Yeah, I've been involved with Fit Learning for just over 2 years. Yeah.
Okay. Well, what would you say in the end? What's the driving motivator? What drives you?
I mean, it's the success, and it's the growth I see in kids, and it's the just like I mentioned before. It's I thrive off of seeing my plans and the things that I do create a meaningful change in kids. And again, I've been able to do that throughout my career, but in this case, I can see the kind of growth that I would have never anticipated was possible in short amounts of time. And just so it's really that it's seeing the growth in kids, seeing helping affect kids' lives in that way.
What would you say? You said Fit Learning has over 30 locations in the U.S., right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So if someone were to come to you, Marc, and say, "Hey, I'm thinking of opening maybe a similar center, or maybe considering other franchises out there," and there's a ton of them, and they're not even comparable because they do totally different teachings than what you do. Well, what would you advise them?
Well, I mean, obviously,
if they wanted to get into that field and the education, but do it privately on their own, like you're doing one-on-one, or.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, familiarize, get a community of people who are doing, if you're not going to use Fit Learning as your model, get a community, understand what you're trying to teach. I don't think it's a smart move to do something from scratch. I think you have to have a science-based and an evidence-based, let's say, curriculum and structure to what you're doing, not just the education piece that you're presenting, but also how you're presenting it in order to be effective. And so I think, the founders of Fit Learning happened to be able to use this as their PhD thesis, and that was a great thing for them. So definitely, I wouldn't recommend anybody try to. There's people that do tutoring, right? So we don't consider ourselves tutors. And if you're looking at tutoring, that's a different story, You can have kids come in with their work that they're trying to, with the work that they are doing in school, and you can help provide them with supports and getting through the work that they're doing in school right then and there. That's not what we do. So if they're looking to do something like that, that's something that you could do on your own if you've got a passion for education and working one-on-one. Again, in that situation too, I think word of mouth is going to be the biggest. Finding a community of other professionals that might be able to think about you when they're talking to parents that might need your services. But unless you're going that sort of route, I wouldn't recommend not doing it without a model and a structure in place that to support you and to constantly provide you with, because one of the things is if you're not provided with that support, and I've seen this in other areas of life and in what I do now, is if you're not constantly being monitored, and it sounds like a bad thing, but I'm still audited on a quarterly basis in my work with kids, even though I do it on a regular basis. I send a video every 3 months, at least, more than that often, but back to Reno so they can watch and make sure that I'm not diverging too much from the model, that everything that I'm doing is still effective. And so I think that if you want to be effective, you really need a group. You can't, there's certain things that, you have to do in isolation, like market and find people and grow your business. But as far as the service that you provide, that should be based on, just like anything else, just like if you're a doctor or, providing therapy or anything like that, you should always be consulting with others and making sure that what you're doing is as effective as it can possibly be.
I'm curious, now that we're in COVID here, how has that affected your business and what changes?
Yeah, lots of changes, but thankfully it was a very smooth transition. One of the things that I helped develop for FIT with the help of Dr. Pritchard, we developed FIT historically, again, been around since 1996. So they would use paper. All of their everything they presented was on paper. They were charting. We have these charts, these special charts that we use on paper. Dr. Pritchard and I developed an iPad-based version of this. So all of our stuff is on an iPad. It's just PDFs, right? But all the PDFs are on the iPad. We draw all of our graphs. We graph on the iPad with an Apple Pencil. And so we'd already had that in place even before COVID. And we were, there was a little bit of resistance from other centers with the investment involved. They were already happy with their paper. Why am I going to change to this? Well, COVID hit, and it was really easy for us to transition into digital, into running these sessions on Zoom, because everything I already had on PDF. I already had my iPad ready to be able to. So other than the fact that sometimes it's easier to motivate kids when they're not on Zoom and they can't click away and they can't do things like that. It's been a pretty smooth transition, and the growth, I have the data to support that the growth that we've made with kids, even via Zoom sessions, for most kids has still been incredibly effective, to the point where in the past, we've only done sessions one-on-one in person. And what we're looking at moving forward is a model where we're going to do more of a hybrid, where some things are going to be done in person, maybe one session a week in person to make sure that we're working on any kinks. But we could continue to do, unless a parent really wants to do in person, we can continue to do Zoom sessions. And continue to do things digitally, and that'll be easier for everybody, really. So it was a concern initially, obviously, for any number of reasons. But I'm incredibly happy with the outcomes we're still getting. So the other unfortunate thing is that with education, with schools not being ready in March for online learning, with schools getting a little bit more ready, but we'll see how it goes come end of the month in September and school starting, there's a big concern, with how far kids are falling behind, and some of these skills that we work on are some of the things that are going to be missing in kids' educations, and they're not going to, you miss session because your internet's down, or you miss a class because your internet's down, and that's where they're teaching you certain letters, or they're teaching you certain facts in math.
Yeah.
This is our service is going to be much more needed as we move forward. I hate to say it, as a result of what's going on with the education system as a result of COVID, and I hope that the education system can adapt. But it's not a fast moving system. I've been in it. I've worked for schools. I worked for what was the 17th largest school district in the county, or in the country, and I know how slow the systems are to adapt. And it's I hope it's I hope that it's faster than it looks like it's potentially going to be.
Well, that's going to be a positive for you as far as business booming, hopefully down the road due to this unfortunate situation. I'm curious, Marc, with, you mentioned you're going to keep only one face-to-face, right? And then everything else will be online.
That's an option that we're going to offer to parents. Yeah.
Is that just with the learning and the center here in DC, or is that all the centers nationwide and everything?
Again, we're not a franchise model. We can kind of do what we like. They give us some advice.
Oh, that's great. So you have that flexibility then.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a model that we're looking at implementing. And again, I'm going to take parents into consideration as to what they like. I have a learner right now who comes in every day. We have all kinds of safety precautions. We wear masks. There's a plexiglass between us, but he wasn't successful at the online. And so we decided to move in person for him, but there'll be options. Like there's certain things that we would really like to still do in person as soon as we're able. We can still get those things done remotely, but they will be more successful in person. And so for those, we'll push at least one session a week in person. But yeah, if another center wants to do only in person, they're welcome to do that. Obviously I have no say, but the headquarters is not pushing us in any direction as far as all that's concerned.
Okay, great. So now we're heading into the fast round. Basically, sure. I ask you a question, you think of the first thing that comes to mind, and you say the statement. You ready?
Good. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So what would you say is your biggest challenge right now at Fit Learning DC with your role?
Well, I think it's basically the one of the crux of our conversation. It's figuring out who the folks are to talk to, how to get the word out about what we do, and being patient about the fact that word of mouth is not a fast spreader of any of these kind of things. And so it's also pairing up with schools and being able to provide the service at a rate that some of the most needy families couldn't afford a service like ours. There's a lot involved, one-on-one sessions, many days a week. So being able to provide that service for as many people as possible.
I'm curious, now that you mentioned that, as far as certain families not being able to afford the services, is there any type of helps or subsidized or scholarships or anything like that? Or
we don't currently in DC at this point offer any scholarships. In Reno and in New York, they have a nonprofit that works with certain underprivileged communities, and that is absolutely something my work with the kids at the beginning of my career, the kids that came from really rough homes. I mean, they were my passion, and they were very formative for me. Working with those kind of kids and helping them. And so it's absolutely something I want to do. The second I'm able, as a business here in DC, I want to create something like that. But at the beginning of the trajectory of the business, is not something that I can do quite yet.
Now, earlier you mentioned the referral sources being the parents. Is it mostly parents, or is it other types of professionals also that come through? Or
I work with neuropsychologists, so they're the professional that does evaluations for kids. So figures out if kids struggling in school, they do evaluations whether they have a disability or just some kind of a learning difficulty. So I've had some referrals from neuropsychologists. Child psychologists, and also from one of my biggest referral sources initially were education advocates. So these are lawyers that work with parents where the school system is letting them down. And there are lawyers who work with those parents to make sure that the kids are getting the supports they need. These are generally kids with disabilities, so kids who have individualized education plans, which is a legal document, and if the school isn't following that individualized education plan, then there are potentially legal repercussions. And so I had a couple kids that have been through the families suing the school district and getting compensation for that, and using that to get services and supports.
I see. What would you say, Marc? What do you wish you would have known back then that you know now?
It's that things take time, and that it's okay. That when you're starting something new and you're trying to make inroads, the conversation that you have today could result in something 3 months down the road, and that's okay, and that you shouldn't and that while the business is top of mind for you and everything to you, it's the person that you talk to, it's one conversation they're having during that day, and so it's understanding that things aren't going to move as quickly as you want them to, and that's okay.
It does take time, and I think even in my business, which is totally different, it's just sort of being top of mind when that need comes.
Right, exactly.
And hopefully they just remember you, and by that, and that's why I've been a little bit more active and social and other, because I just think about where's the attention,
Right.
and the attention it's in mobile, it's on the phone, and what are people looking at? Whether
Absolutely.
whoever, adults, children. So that's, I agree with you though, but it is a long term. It is a long term plan. When I say success, well, what is the first thing, whether thing or person, that comes to mind?
I mean, I've talked about, success being seeing kids improve. One of the underpinning philosophies of fit learning, but also it was a philosophy that it's a theory of counseling, essentially. It's a theory of providing psychological support. It's called acceptance and commitment therapy. And it was something that I described to you before. I learned a lot about it in my counseling program, and then since then, but fit learning ascribes to this in a large way. And acceptance and commitment therapy, one of the tenets of it is living a values-driven life. And so the idea is that you need to establish what your values are. What do you value? And that's not your goal, right? So it's a value wouldn't be owning a business, because that's a goal. There's an end point there. The value is like, what do you want to achieve in life? What is as your, it's sort of an ever moving target, right? I want to be, affect people's lives, right? So that's you can never affect everybody's life, right? So and so living life, a values driven life, having all of your actions be working towards whatever your values are. That's sort of the model of success or the idea of success that acceptance and commitment therapy ascribes to. And that's sort of what I would say is, I have a value of helping change as many kids as I can, and then helping them be successful. And so I'll never help every kid, right? But so success is anything that I can do that works towards that. Any action that I take in life that works towards that outcome is success to me.
I love that. Did you have a mentor? And if so, what did you learn from that person?
Well, I had several, and I was thinking about it because I been listening to your podcast. I knew you were going to ask this question, and all three of my mentors their first names start with J. So the first one was that I mentioned when I was living in Spain. There was a therapist who I worked with, and he just had me reading a ton about different theories of therapy and psychology. And I worked with individuals with disabilities for the first time with him. And so, he opened up that world to me while I was living in Spain. And then June Hopefling is the name of the woman who was the behavior analyst at the school where I worked with. And so she's the one that pushed me to become a behavior analyst and realized my passion for that. And then Dr. Josh Pritchard is he's the person who gave me what at the time, director of a school when I was in my late 20s, graduating from, I thought I want to be a director of some, like a center or a school. I want to run something, and that was my dream. And then 3 years later, I was offered, a position as a director by this person who I'd known from the community. He was a big name in the behavior analytic community. And so, I learned, he's a business guy. He's got a ton of businesses. He supports a ton of businesses. So, June gave me the idea to become a behavior analyst and the passion for that. And he's given me more of an eye for business and the support in that realm. So it's the three of them were, I guess, my biggest mentors over the years.
Do you still keep in touch from time to time with any of them?
So, not as much with June retired shortly after I became a behavior analyst. And
okay.
So, and kind of got burned out by working for the school system and some of the difficulties working. And so didn't want to talk a lot about that kind of stuff when she retired. I still keep in touch with Giuseppe in Spain. He loves hearing what I'm doing and learning more, because what I do is so different from what he does, that he is always a lifelong learner, just keeps getting master's degrees and PhDs just because he wants to continuously learn. And then obviously Dr. Pritchard is my partner in this venture. And so I communicate with him on almost a daily basis.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah.
If you were able to change something, whether personal or even business related, what would it be?
In terms of?
In terms of anything, let's say something that you would like to improve personally or with your business, or maybe do something differently. Again, it can be personal or business related.
I mean, it's still I love what I do. I wish I didn't have to exist. I wish what I didn't have. So like, I wish that I could wave a wand and change the education system and make it so that kids were getting the supports that they needed. I wish that, and kids that, are the ones that are the hardest, that have the hardest time with the stuff that we're talking about, are the ones that are going to be the least likely to be able to get my kind of services or any kind of services that provide the supports like we do. And so being able to affect the education system in a larger way is, I don't know if that's answering your question, but that's really what I would like to see is just general improvement in how we provide education for kids and how we support them.
It is, but that's going to be difficult because I'm thinking just a ratio with the teacher, or even, with it's.
Well, so that, I mean, what I'm saying is that you wouldn't have to provide one-on-one services for all kids. We're the Fit Learning, I've done a little bit of this, but Fit Learning, the headquarters is always trying to figure out ways to, the mission statement of the organization is to transform the education system. The value statement is to transform the education system around the world. And so they continuously trying to figure out ways of improving, not just what we do, but also the education system. And so they're working on creating some models that allow teachers in classrooms to be able to do some of the things that we do.
So and they're open, that the education system is open to that?
No, not okay.
About
that, but for the most part, I mean, you could find some, right? I can't mention the specific places where we've been effective, and
sure.
There might be a superintendent in some school district that is open to the idea, or a principal at a specific school, or even just a teacher who's open to learning certain things.
Okay.
So it's not the education system as a whole. That's not
I understand.
Superintendents across the board. It's, you find specific individuals who are willing to let you try things, and you model out certain things and see how that would work, and hopefully ultimately that turns into a model that is more people are open to. But yeah, as I've said, I've worked for the education system. I know how slow it can be. I think the education system is absolutely necessary, and even if what we have now is better than nothing by absolutely. But there's a lot of ways it can improve, and that's a slow process.
Yeah. Well, I think your services and your need would always be there. Because the only way I see it, and even if you go to even the private school route and not the public school, which the ratio typically is a little smaller as far as the teacher to student ratio, I'm sure the teachings are still different than how you're teaching it or how you're coaching it.
Yeah, I mean, we still get kids that come in from private schools.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what does the future hold for you, for the business? What's the vision? What do you foresee the next 5 years to be like?
Well, ideally we would like to open several offices in the DMV area. So Northern Virginia, into Maryland, as well as DC. There is a Fit Learning, not directly affiliated with me, another person opening a Fit Learning in Baltimore. And but expanding, having more Fit Learnings, and then getting into schools and being able to provide some of those supports like I talked about, not just one-on-one with kids coming in, but also being able to do some help in schools, just expanding the business, and being able to help as many kids as possible with what we do.
That's great. Well, with the expansion, Marc, you mentioned now that the model here may slightly change as far as more online and maybe meet with the learner once a week. Will that need to open more locations still be needed? Since
yes, because if I have a location in right now I'm in Dupont Circle, and I have a family that's even somewhere in Northern Virginia, even to get a kid over to your center, if it's with traffic, an hour plus drive, that's not feasible. And so having locations and having that sense of community is also really important.
Sure.
I'm not able to see my learning coaches right now very regularly, other than on Zoom sessions. We meet several times a week, but that sense of community is really important. And so in some centers where things have opened up a little bit, like in Reno, for example, I know, and I don't know where they are right now, but all the coaches still come to the center, and all the administrators still come to the center, and they work with kids on computers from there. And so having that sense of community between the coaches is really important, to have that sense of family and have that cohesiveness within the team is really, really important. Not just even if they're not, the learners aren't coming in as much, it's still the locations are still important for any number of reasons.
Sure,
so having
sure.
a physical space, I think, is still really important. This is not a thing that would make sense in 100% online. We'd lose a lot.
Okay, I understand. Lastly, what do you like to do in the free time besides obviously work in the business?
Well, having lived in Seattle and then moving to DC, this was not a thing we could do in Florida very much, but going on hikes and camping. I mean, there's some options in Florida, but it's not ideal. So that's been something that I've gotten into quite a bit more recently. I've got a dog. I know that I listened to one of your podcasts today you were talking about this person's dog, and the same thing for me. I'm walking my dog at least an hour and a half a day, 2 hours a day. So spending as much quality time as I can with her is very important.
Okay. So just enjoying the outdoors and being with,
I guess so. Yeah.
with the pet. Okay. Thank you. And where can the audience find you as far as if they want more information about you, the business, like websites or anything?
General information about Fit Learning can be found at fitlearning.com. Just Google Fit Learning. And then, our landing page within that website, fitlearningdc.com. You can email me directly, Marc, M-A-R-C, @fitlearningdc.com. So yeah, that's the best way. Email is really the best way to reach me. If you Google and you can find the phone number, it's usually easier to reach me by email.
Awesome. Marc, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much. It was great.
All right. Take care. Thanks.